Well, hi, Ralph.
How are you doing, Jim?
Okay. Now, what does that intro music suggest to you?
We're in our palatial university studio, which we have not been in for several weeks.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to be back. Someone has rearranged the furniture in here, so I think we have to be back into here much more frequently, or we might get rearranged out.
Yeah, that could be the case. Now, when we think of people rearranging the furniture, uh, we can also think of people whose lives are endlessly the same and who spend much of their day walking around saying, what?
I'm bored.
Yes.
Okay. My kid clients, I don't know, at least once per session, they will tell me about how bored they are. And I think that's the same with adults. In fact, I listened to a radio show last weekend from Philadelphia, from KYY,
Yeah.
and the topic there was on masculinity and the demise of guys. But and we'll talk about that later on in other series. But I looked around and I saw other things that they had done, and one of them was, how can we be bored in this age of information overload? And I will put a link to that one up on Learn More. But yeah, people are saying that they're bored, and there's so much stuff going on. What does that do to our brain?
Well, one of the things that the stuff going on does is uh, it stimulates our brain.
Right.
And every time our brain is stimulated in a new or interesting way, it gives us a hit of the um, drug, if you will, the secretion, dopamine.
Yeah. In fact, it doesn't even have to be in a pleasant way. It can be a scary or unpleasant manner, but if it's new and different, we get this dopamine hit.
Yeah. Now, one of the things then that we could say about getting a dopamine hit is it's addictive.
Yeah. Uh, there's a book out called Dopamine Nation, and the author, Anna Limke, who's a psychiatrist in California, I think at Stanford, says that we're just really, really addicted to these dopamine hits. And so that what happens is that they kind of decline over time, and we need more and more.
Okay, so that accounts for the fact that we get movies which increasingly have what, for lack of a better term, I'm going to call explosive effects.
Right.
So we see the old Star Wars movie, we see the battle star being blown up.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm sure that in recent era there's going to be Captain Marvel, who, somehow or other there's spectacular effects.
Uh-huh.
And we get used to that. And we
Yeah.
say, okay. And then we go to a movie which is basically a movie about people relating to each other in real ways, like real life,
Okay. Yeah.
and having dilemmas and problems.
Right.
And they solve them or they don't. And we end up saying, that movie was boring.
Guess Who's Coming to Dinner was a cutting edge movie in the 60s. But I think today, that would not be seen as such because
Yeah.
it wasn't
It,
spectacular enough.
Yeah, it didn't have any special effects.
Right.
It had, a dilemma of black-white relationships in a time when that was a cutting-edge problem.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the things that we could then say is, okay, we have this dopamine addiction, and as it keeps happening, we need more and more stimulation. Now, I don't know, Jim, if you know the term chasing the dragon.
No.
But that's a term which is used for people who are addicted to narcotics.
Okay.
So you inject your first hit of heroin,
Okay.
and it's just beautiful,
Fantastic. Yeah,
fantastic.
heard my
You,
inmates talk about that.
you feel great for the next 4 hours. Now,
Right.
you spend the rest of your time addicted to heroin chasing the dragon, looking for that feeling that you had
The
with
first time.
the first time.
Okay. Yeah.
And you never find it.
Right. The inmates that I worked with when I was working in prison, who were heroin addicts, would talk about that the dragon, as you called it. But after a while, they were out at 7 o'clock in the morning trying to score dope in order just to keep from being sick. Just get back to quotes normal.
Yeah. Now, that kind of thing, I think, happens with dopamine or other um, substances in the brain, serotonin, and so on and so forth, where we look for the challenge to get more and more.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, one of the things then that happens is if we don't have a challenge, we don't have the dopamine hit, and so the reaction for many people is to say, "I'm bored."
Okay. Yeah. And in this show on the Pulse, the narrator said that she talked to two of the reporters who were heavy into social media. In particular, one called Reddit, which I've never interacted with before. Um, they did not talk about TikTok. They didn't talk about Facebook, but this Reddit thing apparently is quite addictive for perhaps older adults, not older adults, you know,
Yeah,
20 somethings.
20 somethings. Yeah.
Yeah, and so they realized these two reporters that maybe they were quotes addicted unquote.
Uh-huh.
I mean, we don't usually think of addiction in terms of stuff other than narcotics, but and they had talked to being reporters. They talked to this woman, Anna Lemke, about a dopamine detox or a dopamine fast.
Okay.
And the idea here, and we're going to get around to something that you have said before on this podcast, the idea here was to see or decide what kinds of things give you that dopamine hit and then try to eliminate them from your life. And in this case, the reporters eliminated, I think, Reddit and I don't know if half a dozen other things. Podcasts. That was one of the things that both of them said. They were addicted to podcasts. The
Okay.
male reporter even takes his device into the shower with him so he can hear the podcasts
Well, showering.
while showering.
Well, that's pretty extreme. I listen to some podcasts other than our own, but I've never showered with one.
Okay, well that's good, Ralph. You got to be faithful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, the other thing, Jim, about that is, so you say, okay, well, I'm going to try and fast from dopamine hits.
Right. And
So
that was what they were going. That was the concept.
yeah. So the thing is that if you think about food,
Yeah.
one of the things that people are saying now is that periodically you should go on a 12 or 24-hour food fast.
Right. I've heard that. That would
It's-
not go over well in my house.
No, but the thing is that they say eliminating the satisfaction that you get from eating 3 or 4 meals a day is good for you because it means that you no longer responding quite the same way to the stimulation of food.
Okay.
So you kind of withdraw your satisfaction the same way you withdraw your dopamine
Okay.
satisfaction.
All right.
Now, having said that, we look at people and we've talked about this in our course on social media. We look at people, for example, how often have you seen four people in a restaurant and they're all looking at their phone? Nobody's talking to their seating companions.
Yeah, we've seen that a lot. In fact, we do have a pretty interesting video that we could put up also on that. I think it's the demise of civilization, I think it's called.
It's called, yeah.
Yeah.
And so you say, okay, well, people don't interact with each other in the same way because they're busy getting their dopamine hits.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you say, okay, well, what's if everybody is bored when they're not on social media? What's the cure for that?
Okay, well, we'll get to that in a minute. But one of the things that Lemke talked about was that if you go through a detox, you might have the same kind of reaction that people would go through with a detox from heroin, for example, or alcohol, that they might get depressed, they might get twitchy, they might, you know.
Yeah, all of the withdrawal symptoms.
Yeah. And in the case of the two reporters, they said that there were minor symptoms, but, for the most part, they felt better at the end of their 4-week period.
Okay.
And were able, they thought, to be able to give up these things on a permanent basis. Now, I mentioned that we had talked about this before, but why don't you briefly give us the story of the kids that you took into the bush?
Okay, well, we took a bunch of kids from Toronto and other southern Ontario cities. They were very, very urban. They'd never been in anything more woodsy than a park.
They were afraid that the bear was going to get them, the snake was going to eat them.
Yeah, and the first thing we said to them, and this is back in the day when people still carried Walkmans, which tells you how long ago it was, we said, okay, no phones, no Walkmans, no radios, no electronic devices of any kind. Put them in this burlap sack and they'll be waiting for you when we get back in 2 weeks. Well,
the reaction was not pretty.
The reaction was not pretty, and many of the kids, after we reassured them at the end of the first night, we had tents set up, and we said, no, there are no bears within 100 miles. We kind of exaggerated a little.
A little. There was no bear within about 50 feet.
Yeah, and there were no snakes in the area, and there were no vicious predators who were going to attack them, and they could go to sleep. And they lay down to go to sleep, and most of them had gotten kind of over their, intrinsic fear of the bear. And then a lot of them, I heard, saying to each other, I can't sleep, I miss my music.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing is...
Okay, so they missed their little hits of dopamine.
Yeah, and that was, relatively speaking, a minor hit compared to what you get today.
Okay, yeah. So at the end of the 2 weeks, are these kids still saying the same thing?
No, they got to the point where they were saying, I have learned now that even if it rained all day long, if I go under the pine tree and get the dry branches that are dead and break them off, we have good fire starting material. So they had learned something about wilderness survival. They'd also learned that they didn't need the music. They didn't need the dopamine. They didn't need to be able to call their friend. They were, I wouldn't say cured, but they certainly felt that the symptoms they had experienced the first night were very, very much reduced.
Okay, now, we started out talking about boredom, and I printed out a whole bunch of quotes about boredom, and you looked at them and you found one of them that was sort of...
Yeah, the quote that I found, and I think this is absolutely true, is the cure for boredom is curiosity. There is no cure for curiosity.
Okay, very good. So get into your own head, it's kind of like your mind is endless. If you were sitting in a doctor's office and you didn't have anything to read and there was nothing on a screen, you could get bored, right?
Yeah.
Or you could think about your life, what you were going to cook for dinner, what you're going to cook for lunch. Like after this podcast, you're going to go home and cook pirate stew, right?
Right. We can start with a pirate.
Or you and Karen are garden. You can sit back, imagine a garden, think about the next step or next year.
Or what will this garden spin?
Gardens up there.
But the thing is, one of the questions you can ask yourself is, am I doing this garden for me, or am I doing it for the pastor? Now, that might make a difference in plant or but you could think about it. So instead of saying bored, you could say, okay, I'm going to think about the question of who am I doing this garden for?
Okay. And if it's that you're doing it for the passerby, then that's going to be real boring quickly because you don't know what the passerby is going to like or dislike. One of the quotes is, "Boredom is the fear of self." So if you are doing it for yourself, you might become a little bit paralyzed because you might think, well, if I put reeds in the front of my house, or if I let the weeds grow, what will other people think of me?
Yeah, you could do that. Or, for example, you could say to yourself, okay, I'm doing this. Let me see, who am I doing this for? I'm doing it for me. And then you start going into analysis, what you like, what you don't like. And there's a phenomenon known as analysis paralysis.
Paralysis, yeah.
So you can say, okay, I really overanalyzed this and now I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
But that's better than boredom.
Yeah. I mean, it becomes part of curiosity. I remember we did a thing on T-shirts a few months ago, but I saw one T-shirt that says something to the effect of, "Can I overthink this?" We overthink things. That's
we overthink things. Yeah,
this paralysis thing. So, if I was going to respond to a parent who says, "Oh, my kid mopes around the house and says things are boring," what might I say to the parent? Well, can you get the kid into a club? Can you get the kid out into nature? Can you get the kid doing something? Because I think doing is the antidote to boredom, isn't it?
I think so. And the thing is that one of the things that is fairly safe to generalize is that boys and men think about and work better with things than with people. So if you have a boy child, getting him to do something that involves things is probably a good way to go. If you have a girl child, getting her to do something that is social is probably a good way to go.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Or, we could flip that a little bit too. And when we talk about raising boys, we might talk more about getting the boys involved with things that are social and the girls involved with things that are mechanical. And
yeah.
But that's down the line for
that's down the line.
Yeah.
But one of the things, for example, that we can look at is one of the cures for you, Jim, when you were a young, well, not not all that young, but a early teenage boy, was building a radio set.
Right, right. I've always been sort of a builder. I build 5 or 6 boats, and you don't get dopamine rushes as you're putting hammer to nail. But by the time you're finished, you might stand back and say, "Wow,
I built
I
it.
built this," and feel good about it for a while until you put it in the water and it starts to sink.
That only happened once.
It only has to happen once. You can learn from that. And I certainly did. Well, we looked a little bit at this notion of boredom, and I don't think it's necessary for our kids to be bored.
No. And I know that it's going to sound like a cliche, but I'm going to say to our listeners that the cure for boredom, whether you're a kid or an adult, is in your head.
Yeah.
When you start to say to yourself, I'm bored, figure out what you need to think about, because that will help to cure your boredom.
I'm trying to get our music up, Ralph, but it's not working.
Oh, well.
Oh, well.
Oh, well. So,
Ding, 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 ding,
yeah.
ding. Or we can go, oh.
Oh.
So until next time, this is Jim.
And Ralph.
And we're saying 2 things. If you like this and if you've learned something today, like us and subscribe.
That would be a good thing for you to do.
You can pass this on to your friends.
We'd really like it.
Okay.
And the other thing is, keep your stick on the ice.
Because we're all in this
Together.